We start this video directly quoting the journalist Simon Marks. To my knowledge, in the year 2020, he's no longer in Cambodia. He's now living in Ethiopia, covering the elections there. Or perhaps I might say, he's covering the lack of elections there. Quote, in 2009, Nicholas Kristof wrote in the New York Times about a girl named Long Pro, who had finally summoned the strength to tell her stunning story of sexual slavery. He reported that a woman had kidnapped Pro and sold her to a brothel, where she was beaten, tortured with electric wires, forced to endure 2 crude abortions, and had an eye gouged out with a piece of metal by an angry pimp. Pro, Kristof said, was rescued by Mom and became part of her valiant group of former trafficking victims fighting for a world free of sexual slavery. Pro also told her disturbing story on Oprah and appeared on PBS, so on and so forth. Equally hard to believe is the fact that Pro's family, neighbors, and medical records all tell a different story. Dr. Pok Ton said that he performed surgery on Pro when she was just 13, after her parents brought her to hospital with a non-malignant tumor covering her right eye. Photographs in her medical records clearly show the young girl's eye before and after the surgery. So how did she come to be one of Somaly Mam's girls? Tay Sarandon, director of Cambodia's Takeo Eye Hospital, back then, says his staff contacted AFSIP to see if they could admit Pro to one of their vocational training programs. Another of Mom's biggest stars was Mia Rat, who as a teenager gave a chilling performance on French television in 1998, describing how she had been sold to a brothel and held against her will as a sex slave. Late last year, Mia Rat finally confessed that her story was fabricated and carefully rehearsed for cameras under Mam's instruction, and only after she was chosen from a group of girls who had been put through an audition. Now in her early 30s and living a modest life on the outskirts of Phnom Penh, Rat says she reluctantly allowed herself to be depicted as a child prostitute. Somaly said that if we wanted to help other women, I had to do the interview very well.
As well as being accused of fabricating her own story, Somaly Mam has been accused of coaching victims in AFSIP's care to fabricate their stories to attract attention and ultimately more funding.
I don't force a girl to say anything. My story it is enough to cover all the girl story.
One girl at the centre of the controversy is Long Pro. She told international media she was sold into prostitution and that she lost her eye when a pimp gouged it out. To find out for ourselves how Long Pro lost her eye, we travelled to her home village, about 5 hours southeast of Phnom Penh. Local villagers remember her well.
She had a bad eye and she didn't like to go outside of her house. It gradually grew bigger and bigger, and then she never left the house.
Her father didn't know where to take her for treatment. That's why the child stayed in the village for a long time.
Down the dirt track, Long Pro's parents are somewhat bemused by the interest in their daughter. But her father confirms she had a problem with her eye.
We didn't know much about the disease because it was so unusual. I don't know why her eye went like that. She was just a child and we were busy making our living, but her eye gradually grew bigger and bigger. We were very poor at the time, and then the NGO helped us, looked after us with the operation and food also.
Back in Phnom Penh, we meet a former AFSIP employee. She says she arranged with the doctors at the hospital where Long Pro had her tumour removed to bring her to an AFSIP shelter. She doesn't want to be identified for fear of reprisal.
She was not a victim of the brothels. Her eye was caused by a disease. I know this because the hospital told me face to face.
This woman says she worked for AFSIP for 14 years until she was laid off when the Somaly Mam Foundation closed.
There wasn't any story like Long Pro's, so they create it. The reality is it didn't happen. it had a very negative impact. It affected the child's reputation and the reputation of the child's family. It was done for personal benefit with no regard for another human being.
If she was a traumatized person, just a Cambodian person who was just running a not so good organization, that'd be one thing. But she was an internationally acclaimed human rights activist who was getting millions of dollars to help women.
AFASIP's budget was more than $1 million a year, with around $700,000 in funding, plus Somali Mom's $125,000 salary coming from the Somali Mom Foundation.
The question is, who was in charge of the food? The person was Somali's mother. So, if a mother was in charge of cooking, why was the food of poor quality and not enough?
She's also asking questions about where the rest of AFASIP's budget went.
I know Somaly owns 10,000 square meters of land in Siem Reap. She bought a lot of land in Piling province, and she bought a lot of properties in Phnom Penh, and the staff members surrounding her are all her relatives, and every one of them now own houses. The question is, where did those people make their money? I don't know. If you look at their salaries, they probably couldn't afford that.
This is not the first time AFASIP has been suspected of misappropriation. In the mid-2000s, a Spanish donor organisation, ANASVAD, had growing concerns about the NGO's accounting practices.
On one hand, there were not enough invoices to account to the amounts that they were receiving from ANASVAD. And secondly, some of the invoices were kind of repeated. There were like 2 copies of the same invoices. I mean, in the end, it really turned out to be that there has been some sort of forgery, because we could also see that when we visited the projects, you could not really see the impact.
Now you may wonder, what sort of person tells such terrible lies? What sort of person shamelessly profits from lying in this way? In politics, more often than not, when you find people in positions of power who have committed atrocities or carried on such immoral acts, they are people who are already accustomed to making excuses for others in positions of authority who have indulged in similar transgressions of the moral code, or they may be people who've convinced themselves that they're living in a society where everyone around them is engaged in much the same sort of immorality. So here's a quotation from her ex-husband, Somali Mom's ex-husband, Pierre Legros. "Why are you speaking out now?" the interviewer asks. Quote, "I kept silent so far because I really do not think this debate over Somali's lies is of interest. When you work in this world, you know fabricated stories are used by everyone to get funding." So there's the mentality. Everyone else is getting rich telling these guys lies, so why not me too? Why not us also? Why shouldn't we jump on? Yeah, well, if you don't have an answer to that question, maybe you should not be working in the nonprofit and charity sector in Cambodia. Maybe you shouldn't be working in that sector anywhere on planet Earth. What a despicable attitude. But here we see how powerful that tendency to self-justification really can be. And you know what? I lived in Cambodia. I worked in the nonprofit sector. I know. I if I'd wanted to make those excuses for myself, any conceivable sin you might want to justify, you can look around, and if you're looking carefully enough, you can say, well, it seems like everyone else is doing it. No, there are people who are standing up and saying, not me, and you could be one of those. Or you can be like Pierre here and make excuses for it. Get your own hands dirty and fill up your own bank account at the same time, too. Anyway, we continue as he tries to now present himself as the hero. Quote, "But I received death threats from Somali and her entourage telling me not to speak. I do it for my children, for the truth to be restored, and to denounce the logic of a failing system, praising, quote, development, close quote." Wow, you really turned that one around. You should give press training courses, how to answer tough questions to the press. Donald Trump never handles a barbed question this well. Like, yes, well, he doesn't think these lies are of any interest, and everyone else is doing it anyway, but really he's the victim because he's received death threats, and what he's doing now is quite heroic. Yes, applause. Quote, "Moreover, I believe Newsweek and Mary Claire are just arguing about a minor problem. I do not understand why journalists are sticking to the fact that Somaly lied about her origins. Who cares?"
We're taking a close look at sex slavery, and still with me is actress and activist Susan Sarandon, and a woman at the forefront of the battle against sex slavery and human trafficking, Somaly. So I know that you had a really difficult childhood, Somaly. Can you walk us through that?
What we really need to know is, as the director of one of the most well-known NGOs fighting against sexual trafficking, how honestly, fairly, and legally did Somaly act? When you are an icon and an NGO director, people expect you to act with the utmost probity. From what was published in Spain last year, there were mismanagement and sexual abuse allegations in a shelter in 2006. To me, this would be the real issue to investigate. Well, yes, it's always easy to find real issues to investigate. What you're trying to say is that your own personal fortune, that of your ex-wife and that of your daughter, I believe, that's really of no interest at all.
I mean, really, people like to disrespect my crew, but the fact is that you know my name and I don't know you.